Let's bring in our panel this morning. My Sky News colleague Janine Perrott joins us, and Troy Bramston, senior writer with The Australian, political biographer, contributor here at Sky News. Good to see you both. Let's start with Gladys Liu. We're talking a bit about that with Stuart Robert there as well. Look, it really has become the dominant issue politically of the week after this interview with Andrew Bolt. Let's just recapture one of the moments here, talking about the organisation she's been involved in.
I can tell you that I cannot recall if, as is reported, that from 2003 to 2015, 12 years long, that if I can't recall, I can't be an active member of that council, can I?
How can you not recall a membership of 12 years? I mean, we've just shown your name listed there. I've got another document I can show you of your name listed in the other association. That's two associations, association lasting 12 years, and you can't recall it?
Well, I can tell you that I have never been a member of this council, and yeah, it can happen. They can put your name there without your knowledge.
And the next day, Gladys Liu issued a statement confirming she certainly has been a member of three of such organisations. Troy, it's either being evasive or forgetful here. Stuart Robert, and this is certainly the government's position, it was just a clumsy or a bad interview. What do you think about that particular element?
Well, I think it certainly was a train wreck interview here on Sky News, and the rest of the week didn't particularly play out all that well for her, given that there are now increasing suggestions and questions and doubts about, you know, what the intelligence agencies told government ministers about Gladys Liu and her background and her connections to China today, her membership of those organisations, political donations. Look, I don't think that she is some kind of Chinese agent of influence or some kind of spy here, but clearly she needs to clear the air. And I think it would be in her interests and the government's interests for her to go into the parliament and give a full and frank explanation. And I can't understand why that didn't happen this week. I'm not surprised that the government has come out very, very strongly to defend her, because some of the attacks clearly have been overblown, and maybe there is an element of some kind of racism here from some quarters. I mean, that's possible. But the government has a very slim majority, and they're going to do everything they can to defend that.
Yeah, I want to come back to this suggestion from Scott Morrison. I don't know if he used the word racism, but that's kind of what he's inferring. But Janine, look, I agree with Troy, and certainly I've been told there's no direct problem with Gladys Liu in terms of, you know, being some sort of agent of foreign influence and so on. But what still stands out is the extraordinary amount of money she's boasted about raising for the Liberal Party, more than $1 million, where that money's come from, her links to organisations that, you know, she conveniently couldn't recall during that interview she'd been a member of. Do you think there are still some big questions here?
Huge questions, and it's not going to go away. And these questions were around, as I keep saying, immediately after the election. When you talk to any senior Libs about what the weak link was with a one-seat majority, Gladys Liu's name came up again, and not as an agent of Chinese influence, but because of the donation question mark. And I mean, the Herald Sun newspaper had already raised the issue about $300,000 that had to be returned. I think the $1 million is conservative. But what it showed, and in interviews you've seen with the former Victorian Liberal leader, Liberal Treasurer Michael Kroger, Liberal President, that they knew how many millions she was raising. There was obviously the fact that Stuart Roberts said they're going over this carefully now. He twice said this morning to you that they're checking it all. Well, it's a bit late now, and you have to look at this when somebody is raising that much, and you know, it is something that has been a question mark over, and the trouble is the timing. We are seeing what's going on in New South Wales with ICAC, Chinese donations from the Chinese community.
Well, is this the common thread here that, you know? Yeah, I mean, yes, both relate to the Chinese community predominantly in both the New South Wales Labor Party example and here. Troy, you know, they're very different. One had an Aldi bag of cash that has caused a lot of concern. But is the problem here the reliance on huge donations, you know, basically fueling political careers? You know, is this the problem here with Gladys Liu, the amount of money that she's raised? What donors expect for that money?
I think you're right about that. I mean, and that's where this story will probably go next, and we're going to hear more about these donations and the source of these donations. There's no doubt that Chinese influence in Australian politics is real and has been growing, and there are a lot of cashed-up businessmen and businesswomen in this country who want to involve themselves in the political process by contributing to political parties. Now, on the one hand, it's a bit rich to suggest that the Labor Party is somehow anti-Chinese when down in Sussex Street they're happy to take a plastic bag full of $100,000 cash. But it does raise a broader question about both political parties and their connections to Chinese businessmen and women, and the source of these donations, and whether they're properly being disclosed, and whether or not we know enough about the people that are making these donations. So we're going to hear more about this on the Labor side, and no doubt we're going to hear more about this on the Liberal side as well. And that's where the Gladys Liu matter, I think, will go next. There'll be further questions about the amount of donations and the source of those donations from the Chinese Australian community.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, the Prime Minister used the words grubby smear on Thursday to essentially try to shut down Labor's questioning of all of this, and suggested that this would offend the 1.2 million Australians of Chinese descent and so on. Stuart Robert there was essentially saying the grubby part of this was Labor's tactic in question time to raise questions it knew would be knocked out because governments can't answer, what intelligence advice they've been given about someone or not. But Janine, is there also a bit of xenophobia here in this whole issue around Gladys Liu?
I don't think so. I think the issue is we have lots of Chinese Australians in public life. We have lots of politicians from other migrant backgrounds. They're not being questioned. She's not being questioned over a background, but it is absolutely red hot for the Prime Minister and other Libs to say that. When you note that they used her Chinese background, that was the selling point for Gladys Liu. She did a debate with her counterpart, her Labor counterpart, in Mandarin. She had those controversial Chinese signs that are already the subject of another issue. They played up when she got into Parliament that she's from a Chinese background. So you can't on one hand use it. They didn't just say, here's another Australian from another ethnic background. They played up, they play to that Chinese audience, they play to the 1.2 million, which isn't the issue. When you're in Parliament, you represent all Australians, not the Chinese community, and it should not be an issue. And I think you only need to read Andrew Bolt's reply to that. I think it's this whole impression that Gladys Liu, she might be new, but when they talk about fit and proper is, should you be able to answer your own questions? There's now talk that the Prime Minister's office is going to be micromanaging her office. At the very least, she should be able to get up and read a statement, and I think that's what concerns people. It's a much broader issue than where she's from.
Yeah, Troy, what do you think? Was there a grubby element to where Labor went this week on this?
I think Labor did over-egg their case a little bit, I don't think she's intrinsically a bad person or, as I said at the outset of the show, an agent of Chinese influence or anything like that. And so it was a little bit of a sad moment to see, those sort of tears welling up in her eyes, feeling that she's under huge attack. But, it's in her interests, as I said earlier, for her to make a full and frank statement to the Parliament. That's the vehicle where she is accountable to, the body that she's accountable to, and the vehicle that she should use is the Parliament. She should be going into that chamber and giving a full and frank account all of these matters. Her membership of Chinese government-backed propaganda organisations, the source of Chinese donations, how many of them, her relationship with Chinese government officials located here in Australia in embassies and consulates. She should be talking about that because it's in her interest and it's in the government's interest. It's not surprising that the Prime Minister came out very, very strongly, also went on WeChat to defend her, but she's got to stand up for herself, and that is her obligation as a Member of Parliament.
And David, sorry, can I just make one point about Labor? And I agree, I think they probably have gone too far. They are better just sitting back because let's remember, all this is coming from the right, not the left. It was the Herald Sun newspaper that brought out the donations thing. It was Andrew Bolt on Sky. She obviously thought she was going to get a nice run from a friendly interviewer there, and she was very much mistaken. And the leaks that are coming out of the state Liberals. She worked for Ted Baillieu's office, and other Liberals too. So Labor doesn't have to push this. Her own side is doing enough damage already.
All right, let's leave Gladys Liu there. We'll see what further emerges during the course of this week in Parliament. I want to turn to the government's relations with the business sector because Ben Moreton, he's the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister. He's one of Scott Morrison's closest confidants in Parliament. He gave a speech at a Chamber of Commerce and Industry event during the week. He attacked business for becoming, quote, self-appointed moral guardians, listening to Get Up too often. Janine, is he essentially saying what privately many in the government are saying, that companies, private companies, perhaps shouldn't be getting involved in public campaigning on things like same-sex marriage or climate change?
They might be saying it privately, but they've also been saying it pretty damn loudly publicly too, which is not helping their relations. Look, it is extraordinary, I think, that they're telling them how to, and this is on top of... Now, look, a number of the Nats, Matt Canavan's been doing this in very fruity language. They tend to dismiss the Nats. They've often had a go at them. They, you know, if a national MP is saying something about the business community, it's not as big a concern. What hit them was Josh Frydenberg a couple of weeks ago when he had a very targeted attack on what they should do with their money, and they pushed back saying, hold on, we represent shareholders, we will not have government tell us what to do. And then you have a bloke who, you know, is not exactly a household name, this Ben Moreton, lecturing them on what they should be doing.
Pretty important guy, though.
He is, but to the, I can tell you, to the business community, it's different to having Josh Frydenberg. Him telling them what they should be doing is a little bit... I mean, they do take it badly. They don't like criticism. There are obvious criticisms that should be made about the way they're doing it. What's interesting was the same criticism was made with a lot more nuance, and I think more importantly this week, by Graham Samuel, who is an ex-merchant banker, a leading business person, and in evidence to the Economics Committee about APRA and the Banking Royal Commission, he made exactly the same point, but he made it a bit more subtly, and he pointed out that you can't go off on these tangents while you're under a cloud on your basic fiscal responsibilities and other things. And I think they need to be very careful in the government that they don't make it an ideological war, because, you know, you might, that's the kind of stuff you used to get from Paul Keating and Labor governments, not from a Liberal government.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a piece of legislation, Troy, that's coming back this week in Parliament from the government that business hates more than any other, not just those in the power sector either. It's the big stick legislation. It would enable, ultimately, the federal court to tell a power company it has to sell an asset, a coal-fired power station or a gas plant or whatever. It would also give the Treasurer the power to essentially set and control prices. Now, you know, private sector hate the thought of that. How do you see this one playing out?
Look, I'm quite surprised and quite shocked that this legislation is proceeding. Of course, it had been on the table before the last election, but the Liberal Party is supposed to be the party of private enterprise, of free market, supposed to be the pro-business party, and here they are telling businesses how to structure their affairs and how to operate in a marketplace. And that, to me, is quite surprising. And I can tell you there's a number of Liberals I'd spoken to months ago who had said to me they had a lot of questions about this legislation and were not fully on board. But the government is proceeding with it. And so this is going to damage relationships with business even further, because if a Liberal coalition government is moving into this space of possibly divesting businesses, breaking them up, against their own will, well, then this is akin to some kind of government socialism.
Wouldn't there have to be some evidence of price gouging, though, Janine, to warrant, an order to break up, to sell off an asset?
Oh, good luck with prosecuting that one. It's called capitalism. To go to the next level that warrants this is going to be difficult. And let's say, where does it stop? This is the fear. It's OK, you know, it's all very populist to say it's about bringing your power prices down. But what other?
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of other companies out there, private health insurance, lots of things that are vital to the well-being of Australians that have been privatised. I mean, look at what's happening in the aged care sector at the moment this week. The biggest aged care provider, Bupa, which is apparently too big to fail, was the argument of the industry. So we have a lot of sectors. We still have the Banking Royal Commission. There's concerns that there's a bit of a weakening of the resolve there. So to go after the power companies when a lot of other very powerful free market areas are worried is a very dangerous path.